earliest memory was, I don't know, it was probably, may not have been my second birthday, but I remember going to work with my mother. She worked in a convent. She was a convent school, and she worked in the catering department in the kitchens. And I remember playing with a car and a nun coming along to me and getting down on her knees and playing with a wee toy car in the corridor in the convent school in Lisburn. That was, and probably about in the sort of 66, 67 time, sometime around about that there. Oh, school life, well, I went to school, and as I say, homework wasn't a thing for me. Academia, at the time it wasn't, but I realised now after I left school that you have to do a bit of studying, because secondary school I went through, I've done a lot of sports, mountain climbing, canoeing, football, running, athletics. And then I left school and I realised that, I have to go back and start studying. I had to start doing night classes to get enough GCSEs to carry on and get into an apprenticeship. School was very, very enjoyable. It was local. It was only 5 minutes up the road. I walked up the road every morning. I got out of bed at 20 to 9 and I was in school for 9. I left school at the age of 16 in 4th year. I enrolled in a pre-apprentice course, an apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, and it's like a foundation for apprenticeships where it's a 1-year course, and you do a rolling 3 weeks doing joinery, 3 weeks doing bricklaying, 3 weeks doing mechanical, engineering, 3 weeks electrician, plumbing. Went through all the different trades, and I thoroughly enjoyed the whole year. You know, you got a skills. I was always a very practical sort of person. I worked with my hands and making things. I would have an old washing machine. I took it apart and took the motor out of it and built a small lathe. While at the technical college in Lisburn doing the pre-apprentice course, I would have made a lathe for making floats for fishing. It wasn't the safest thing now whenever I look back, but sort of 240 volts exposed, but it was a successful enough thing. It did what I wanted to do. I was always working on bikes and things like that. I'm a practical sort of person that way. So I seen a job advertised in a Telegraph in William Adams's Textiles. It's at the bottom of the motorway, at the end of the motorway there. It's closed up now. But I applied for the job there. It was a tenter, but it said essential engineering experience. And I went, oh, that sounds good, I'll try that. I didn't know what a tenter was. So I applied for the job and I was successful. I got the job, so I moved into the textile industry. William Adams is a weaving company which produced damask tablecloths with Celtic designs, Celtic towers, shamrocks and all of this, and they sold all over the world. Their fabric sold all over the world. The factories was passed down through families over generations. It was the same sort of mill owners that would have had within Adams's passed down through 3 generations. Actually, one of the things was Ronnie Adams he's probably, whenever I was there, he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s. He was the first private owner to enter the Monte Carlo Rally and win the rally in sort of 1954. That was one of the first things I was told whenever I went through the door. So I was in there and I went in to the interview, successful enough. They asked me what my experience and what the experience of textile machinery was, and I had to be honest, it was very, very little. But I was successful enough, I got the job, and I can remember for the first day I walked into the factory and I looked at these big massive machines, and they looked like something out of the War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells book, where there was these big machines and all of the harnesses coming down like tentacles. So, and the noise was just like sort of deafening, you know, nobody could hear each other talking. So that was my first impressions of how I got into the textile industry. I went into the job as a tenter, as it says, and advertised as a tenter. Now a tenter, I didn't know what a tenter was. I had to look it up and see what a tenter was. And a tenter is somebody who is the maintenance on the factory floor of looms. If there was 40 looms or 60 looms, there would be tenters looking after these looms. Because in them days, those weavers operated the looms and changed the bobbin in the shuttle on a regular basis, and they were paid on what they wove. So if the loom was broken down for an hour, they lost an hour's wages on that loom. So a tenter was, in many, many years ago, in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, was a respected job because all of the weavers' wages depended on that tenter. And apparently tenters used to get quite fat as they got older because they got all the buns and cake. I went into the factory and I started working with, I had to work with a weaver for 4 weeks to get an understanding of the loom. I had to work with the spinners who actually spun not the thread, I spun the perns for the feed into the shuttles. I worked with the maintenance, there was a maintenance fitter. I worked with the other tenters. I had to work with the design chap. There was a design chap, very, very good gentleman. I still meet him, he's in his 80s. And there was another guy called a mounter who would have done the harness mountings it was a trade on its own. All these were individual trades. And I worked with the cloth passers and the cloth menders. So you had to have an understanding of the whole operation within the factory floor, because everything, if there was a fault in the fabric, it went back to the tenter. If there was a fault in the winding, I had to understand why that shuttle was snagging on the weft yarn, and I had to go back to the winding frames and adjust winding frames. So wasn't so much pressure, but it was more like let's blame the tenter if it's not working. At the interview, at the time of the interview, I told them that I hadn't completed my apprenticeship as a toolmaker. I had 1 more year to do it as a toolmaker. And they asked me, I didn't volunteer, they asked, would you be interested in continuing your day release for your toolmaker as a City and Guilds? And we will also put you on as a tenter, a City and Guilds apprenticeship. And it's a day release also for that to the technical college. And I guess, well, that'd be great, yes. So I qualified as a toolmaker, and then in the final year, in my final year of my toolmaking, I had 2 days off work going to the technical college, one as a toolmaker, one as a first year apprentice tenter. So then I had to continue on for another 4 years and as an apprentice tenter at a day release to the technical college in Belfast, learning different machines. Whenever I started, there was 7 apprentice tenters that year in the technical college in Belfast. And as I progressed through my year, and my final year, I think there was only 2 apprentices. You know, it was sort of in decline then. The textile industry was sort of going down. But I'd done my apprenticeship, went through it, and we had many textile visits. There was maybe every 3 months there was a visit for the apprentices to go around the factories throughout Northern Ireland. 1 month or 1 visit could have been Dales in Donaghcloney, Spence Bryson in Armagh, been in Spence Bryson, Armagh, Ulster Weavers, Dales in Donaghcloney. And I went there probably as about 88, somewhere around in the late 80s anyway. We went there maybe 87, and we had a day there, and we went into the factory. And at that time they'd just invested in Dornier Looms, new jacquard Dornier Looms, and they were the Rolls Royce in the 80s. And within the textile world, within textiles throughout the world, Dales was nicknamed NASA, because of all the best equipment, all the best looms, and all the best everything, you know, in it. It was brilliant to see. I was working on looms that was doing 60 to 70 picks a minute. They were working on looms that were doing 200, 300 picks a minute. The day release was a great eye-opener for it, because it introduced you to all areas of weaving, terry towel weaving, jacquard weaving, napkins weavings, everything, because lots of factories specialised in different areas. And there's a chap called John Dudgeon. He would have been a manager in Ulster Weavers many years ago, and then he moved on he was a lecturer in the tech. And he was an old schoolmaster type sort of attitude. Some of the apprentices didn't get on with him at all, but I found a very, very interesting man. You know, it was great to work with him, and I learned an awful lot from him over the years. Lambeg Textile Research Centre, that was another visit. So there's many visits throughout Northern Ireland. Ulster Carpets also was so we had a day working in each company to see how they actually worked. There was a lot of dust and grease on the floor, you know, bits of oil and the dust from the looms, and it just accumulated up to this sort of a tarry like porridge sometimes under the looms. The noise, as I say, and the looms were all run by big high horsepower motors, but they still had the shafts running through the factory where the steam motor would have been many years ago in the steam room to power the whole factory. They had where the belts would have been, the big leather belts would have been there, but the belts weren't there, but the big flywheels were still there, and the levers were still there for pushing them across to start the looms. You know, I thought the big shaft running through the length of the factory was very sort of looking up at it and going, oh, this is a bit of out of Noah's Ark, you know. Now the looms were probably about 60 to 80 years of age, but they were working on a double shift, so they were twice that age. There was 4 Bestbrook self-twilling jacquard machines. They were the Rolls Royce in their day. And the looms were coming to that age where they all needed replaced, and it was a case. There was a chap I used to work with, one of the tenters was Tommy Sersner, a Portland own man. He lived off the Donegal Road, and he was a good age for a man. He was in his 70s then, whenever I was an apprentice. He would have been, one of his statements was, whenever the manager would have came down, why is this loom doing this, or why is this loom doing that? And he wasn't long at holding back. Tommy would let it go, well, we can't get these parts anymore, we have to make them, so we can't fix these looms, we can just keep them going. What do you want us to do? Well, I had a low one time now on a loom, the jacquard looms. The machine was above, the jacquard patterning equipment was above the loom, and the weaver was on the ground, and I was up at the ladder fixing this loom one time, and she was looking after 4 looms. There was 1, 2, 3, 4. They were opposite each other, so she could switch them off and on. And he just hollered down. So there was one of them skipping, and I fixed the skip on the card, pasted a little bit of card in and covered the hole that was skipping. And I hollered down at her. You just shout down, and they look up. And she looked up. She says, lady, the factory, the weavers, most of the weavers in the factory were in their sort of 60s, 70s. Some people had worked there 30, 40, 50 years, had just continued weaving. And she looked up, and as she looked up, I shouted to weave, and I seen out of the side of my eye a shuttle bounced out of another loom, and as she's looking up, I could see this shuttle in slow motion, but it was probably travelling at about 80 miles an hour with a sharp point on it, and it hit her right in the teeth right here, and it smashed her teeth, you see, and I just seen her head going out into her hands, and the blood, and I was at the top of the ladder, so to run down, and the lady, I went down, run down, just, what do I do here, you know? So she just looked up, took her hand, and there was a bit of blood coming from her face, and she says, look at that, my new false teeth, it smashed my new false teeth. And I was going, thank God, that's all it smashed. There's another time myself, I was up fixing some damaged needles on for these 4 looms. The lady only worked a day shift, so these 4 looms was sitting idle, other looms were going in the factory. I says, I'll fix this whenever one of the needles was jamming in it. I says, I'll go and fix this. And I had all my tools. And it's a small gantry between the looms. There was four jacquard heads. And the planks of wood are about 4 inches, the width of your steel toe cap boots, and they're about 1.5 inches thick. And they're maybe 10, 12 foot long. And as you went to the middle of the plank of wood, it went down like that. And those 2 planks of wood, one for working in these machines and one for working in these machines, probably about 2 feet apart. So I was standing in a plank of wood in the middle with all my tools, my hammers and spanners and whatever. So I took the needle guard off and worked the needle, freed up the needle, and it finished. Now the machines themselves, they had steel girders holding them because they were a lot heavier. But I had a foot on the steel girder and a foot on the plank of wood, and I turned really quick, lifted my tools. You didn't even look down because it was like this working on scaffolding. You didn't look, you just walked along. And I turned really quick and onto the plank of wood, and the plank of wood just snapped. And I went down. But the memory that I have of that is where I was holding my tools and they just went, as I went down. I thought they stayed still like a cartoon sort of movie. And I went down and I grabbed the harness cord, which sort of slowed my fall down. As I dropped, it burnt into my fingers here. My shins hit the front rail of the loom, and I landed on the red brick tiles on the floor. And my first immediate reaction was, I think I'm all right, but then all the spanners and hammers come down and hit me on the body. But as I was lying there, I just within a wee brief shock for a few seconds, and one of the guys, the other tenter, came in through the door, and he just seen, and I seen him running over to me. And obviously he knew what happened, and he looked at me, and he helped me up, and I couldn't talk with shock. I went, and as I come round, he said to me, Kevin, I'll give you this. Like, he says, after falling out 15 or 20 feet down, he says, like, you were able to do fish impressions to me. Reading the papers and watching the news, you'd have seen every month or every couple of months another textile company closes down. Whole factories were moving out. So I went, this isn't good. So I started applying for other jobs elsewhere. I applied for different jobs in engineering, and things weren't coming up. So I started looking further afield. I ended up actually applied for a job in New Zealand, and they asked me for a reference. This was as a tenter. And I came into the college, to the technical college, and I asked John Dudgeon, one of the lecturers, could he give me a reference? And during the conversation we were chatting, and he says, yeah, no problem. He says, but there's a job over in the university that would be ideal for you, Kevin. It's a job they haven't been able to get anybody to do it for a while, and it's a technical coordinator for weave in the weave workshop. I says, well, I'll go over and see them. So I went over and came over to the art, well, it was known as the Art College then, in York Street. And I came over here and I met the academic, and I said, look, I believe there's a job you can't fulfill. She says, yes, we have had 2 people doing it on a rotation. Both of these people have retired from this job, but they're still keeping the place going. I says, look, well, I'm considering going further afield for work. Possibly could you get it advertised? So she contacted personnel within the university, and it was advertised within a couple of weeks. I came along, I applied for the job, and I didn't go anywhere else. That was me. That was over 30 years ago. I've been in the university since as a technical coordinator within the weave workshop, doing the practicals, teaching the practicals of weaving to first, second, third year students. I used to do a lot of weaving a bit of, when I was younger, before I was married and the family came along. I had a lot more time. Linen weaving, I love linen weaving. Linen has a sort of hypnotizes you, and I don't like it to beat me. It's a very sensitive yarn to use, temperamental also, and it's no good falling out with it because you're going to lose. It has no elasticity, it doesn't stretch. It stretches by 0.2% over its length, and then it'll break, so it doesn't take much abuse. Well, I have woven different things. I've wove different stuff for some designers. Recently wove scarves for a designer in Dublin, and scarves are sort of retailing between 1,000 and some of the scarves. So some of the expensive ranges it would be 1,000 to 1,200 euros. I'm not a designer as such. I'm more of a technical person within the weaving. I enjoy the sort of the challenges of multi-layered fabrics and things like that. Not so much designing. I did weave some stuff for another designer. It was for Christian Lacroix, and it was a coat that was made into some sort of little jacket for some of the Hollywood stars bought it, but I just weave the fabric. I don't know what happens to these things afterwards. I spoke with a number of loom manufacturers throughout the world, and there's one of them now has, one in 2002 we made an agreement to go forward with this, and he developed it, and myself in collaboration with Looms developed it into a commercial product which is now selling worldwide. So some of the looms that have the counterbalance dobby on it they're in Australia, South Korea, Germany, Ireland, Canada, America, Mexico, all over the world. They're selling all over the world.